Okay, so now we're going to go through an example code, which is the project is called Arrays. I went into WebStorm, I created a project using Angular CLI. I called it Arrays, and then I started, the scaffolding happened. I started looking at the app component, and I started updating it to demonstrate some things about the array. Now, before I went and extended the project, I did go into my project directory, did an ng space dash v to make sure I'm using Angular 5, and then I did an ng space npm space start to start my project. So the transpiling and the optimization and the packaging and everything happens into this virtual directory, and then the ng space server started, and so and the server started and is listening for TypeScript changes and project changes. And when I change the project, you'll see that the transpiling and packaging happens again. And I could go to localhost at port number 4200, and I could render the application. Now, this application has no rendering. It really is just logging stuff. So we're going to go through the app component and show you how to use the arrays and the objects associated with the array and assertions and stuff like that. So basically what I did was I take my component and I imported, it generated the import component from Angular Core. I need that for my annotation. It makes my app component an Angular component, and I have a selector, a template URL, and an external style sheet, which I'm not really using because I'm just logging in this particular example. And then I import start as assert from assert, and so I have some assertions going on in my application. I need assert. Okay, so now if you look at my component, I have a title. I have an array called cars, which I've instantiated using an array literal. So this is an array literal example. Basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a cars array with Volvo, Camry, Mercedes, and Tesla. Now, the size of this array, let's say the length of this array, is 4. But the indices start at 0, 1, 2, 3. Although the length is 4, the array index starts at 0. So just keep that in mind. So if I do this cars array and I define it in my app component, within my constructor, I'm initializing the app component object, but I could also do an assertion and say this.cars.length is identically equal to 4. If not, throw an error and log this in the console. So that's just going to work. Nothing's going to get logged in the console because I'm asserting that the length of the cars array is 4, and in fact it is 4. Okay, so the first thing to point out with arrays is that the index starts at 0, and if you count if you want to reference these elements, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, even though the length of the array is 4. So that's the important thing to understand immediately. Okay. Secondly, so here's an example of what I'm just saying. If I do an assert this.cars and I say this.cars.length -1, that is the last element of the array. This array is of length 4, but this last index is index 3. Okay, so I'm basically saying the cars array of the index 3 is identically equal to Tesla. And if not, an exception will be thrown, and I'll be logging this. Last element in cars array is Tesla. But nothing gets logged because the assertion is correct. Okay, and then what I do is I say this.cars4 is undefined. What I'm pointing out here is that the index here is 0, 1, 2, 3, and if you go to reference the fourth element, let's say the fourth index, then you'll get an undefined value. So this will be correct. Nothing will be logged. If it's not correct, then you'll see the fourth index of the array's value is undefined. Should be true. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, so and then we have an animals array up here that we declared as an array of string. And I'm doing an assertion here after I instantiate it with pig, horse, and cow, what I do is I then I assert that the animal's last element is identically equal to cow. Okay. If it's not, an exception will be thrown, and the log, the last element, should be cow, right? So all these assertions will not log anything. And then I invoke this method, change length of array. And that's when I go through some examples and stuff. But let's just first look at the first piece of this application. So all these things are true. And here I could actually, okay, let's do this. Let me comment out the method. And let's go to, notice that it gets transpiled again. And let's go to the application and see what's getting logged. Okay, so nothing is getting logged, okay? Because all I'm doing is the assertions in the constructor, and they're all true, okay? So now let's go and change the assertion. Okay, suppose I were to say, oh, well, this should identically be Tesla. Because I make the stupid mistake that, well, it's not stupid. I make the mistake that this is an index 4 when in fact it's index 3, right? 0, 1, 2, 3. So let's see what happens when I do that. I see an assertion error. The fourth index of the array's value is undefined. Huh. Let's see. Well, that's correct. This is the third value. So this assertion is incorrect. So now let's go back and say it is undefined. And I put this triple equal sign. So let's just see what happens with that. Okay. So the assertion is okay. So let's go back and let's continue our example. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go and look at this particular function. I'm going to uncomment this out, and I'm going to go take a look at this function. Now, I did a couple of things here to get you a little bit, show you some ways to work with arrays, and it's the basic form of array. So first what I do is I log entering change length of array. Before changing the arrays, I look at the cars array, and I use this JSON stringify. So let's go take a look at that and just to see what that looks like, okay? So the code transpiles, it reruns, and I'm showing the array of cars by saying I'm going to stringify the array and show it to you. Now I want to make a distinction of that with just not using stringify. So if I don't do this, let's see what happens. And I always use stringify, which is kind of weird because I'm thinking as I'm making up this course, I'm thinking I don't want to use this JSON.stringify. It doesn't even fit on my view graphs. I want this to happen easily, so I remove it and let's just see what happens there. And so basically that's an easy way to log the elements of the array. Now I don't see the left bracket and the right bracket, which I really do want to see. Just pointing that out is a simpler way to log what you're doing. Okay, so let's go back and change that back to the way it was. Okay, so now let's continue. Okay, so now I have animals and I stringify the animals. I'm going to see the animal array as well. I'm going to see the elements in the array, and then I display the car's length and the animal's length. And I'm using it at this point because the arrays are in the constructor, they're in the app component object, so I need to use the this. and I could have done something a little bit different, which I'll show you later. But your attributes will be in your app component, and your methods will access your attributes. So I could have made these examples a little bit simpler by putting the constant array inside of the method, but I didn't do that. I'll do that later on with the other methods. Okay, so let's take a look at these first. I did log this stuff, and let's see where it came out. Cars, animals, car length is 4, animal length is 3. So I basically got this stuff covered here. It's logging, and I have a clear understanding of what my array lengths are, and now I'm going to drill down into the indices and other attributes of the array. So now, if I want to add another element, I could do a number of different things. First of all, if I defined cars of the 4th index to be some string, it would dynamically change the size of the array. Now I log the length, and I do an assertion that the length should be 5. So notice the length will be 5. The length is now 5, right? So that's a sanity check of what I'm doing here. Now let me go and do one more thing just to see what happens here. What would happen if I put a numeric in here? The code transpiles and it reevaluates, it runs again, and notice after changing the array length for cars, it did put a numeric in there. So I'm pointing out with the array literal. You can do this. You could also do it with the array constructor, but most of the time when you deal with the array built-in array constructor, you are declaring the type of the array. So that, however, a lot of times you could also say it's of type any because you're expecting JSON data, and that's one way to say that the data could be any type of data because it's a JSON object. Okay, so anyway, let's go back and change this back. Okay, so let's go back to that. Okay, now, of course, I logged the car's length. Now it's now 5. I did an assertion. It's 5. Okay. Now, I'm going to set the animal's length to 2. Now, remember, the animals array had pig, horse, and cow in it. So now, when I change the length to 2, I'm saying the last element is now horse, and the assertion works. But after changing the array lengths, I now look at the array lengths, and cars changes, animal changes. The length of cars should be 5. The length of animals should be 2. Okay, and then I go and I log some of the animals. So let's take a look at what happened. Okay, so I originally started out with cars and animals having these elements. Then I went in and I set the Pontiac element for cars. And I also set the animal length to 2. So really what happened is I shortened the animals array and I added an element to the cars array. And I look at the lengths, and now the car length is 5, the animal length is 2. And when I go to log animal of sub 0, animals of sub 1, and animal of index 2, the animal index 2 winds up being undefined. Okay, now I'm going to make a general statement. Nah, I'm not going to make that general statement. But just be careful. I'll make a statement. Be careful when you're deleting an index of an array, because it really defines it to be undefined, and keeps that space in the array. Just to point out if you're worried about memory efficiency and stuff. Okay, notice I then went back and I set the length of 3 again. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I set the length of the length of animals to 2. I lost my last element. Now I'm setting it back to 3, and it's still undefined. Okay, so let's go back and just summarize that. Okay, so that was a simple example where I basically looked at animals of the third index after I set the length to 2. I logged the second index, and then I set the length back to 3. This probably should have been 2. 0, 1, 2. Yeah, this probably should have been 2. And the value is still undefined. Okay, so that's just a basic introduction, and like I said, so let's just play a little bit here with this. Now, what happens if I did this? I changed the fact that is array of type string. Still transpose an O. It tells me that the array needs a generic type. And that is because I'm declaring the type of my array in my app component. So I just want to point that out. What would happen if I let's suppose if I even just left out the type, whether that would make a difference? And now I'm going to run into some problems here. But when you start using arrays, trust me, you're going to go through all these different issues and trying to figure out what's what and how to do things and what works, what doesn't work. And you'll go through all these things. I could say defining an array with a certain type is a very, very common thing. So you do want the generic type defined, and so let's just see if this even transpiles. Because here's what I'm thinking. I have something called animals, and I'm instantiating a new array, and I didn't define its type here, and so the question is, can I do this and get away with it? And if it doesn't work, I'll just move on. But what I was going to try to show you is, okay, if you don't declare it that all those elements to be a string, I want to see whether we can get away with defining one of those elements to be a number. And what's probably better, before I ruin my application, let me do this. Let me go back to this, because animals could be used elsewhere in different functions, so I really shouldn't mess with that. But the real question is can I do something like this? So I think we've seen the first error. And I think it's working now. Let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy one of these, put it here. And I'm going to remove this. Let me just leave that. Okay, and so let's see what happens with that. Okay, so the point I'm trying to get across here is that with the array literal and the built-in array constructor, you're defining this array, and you could put anything in there. So that's why very important for you to understand here that. And I'm going to remove all this stuff. Very important to understand here that when you declare an array of strings, that you're saying I want the type of all those elements in the array to be a string, and that is extremely valuable. Okay, so let's move on.